What happens when a single act of unchecked arrogance meets a mind that measures the world in probabilities and consequences? On Solara Airlines Flight 922 from Los Angeles to Paris, the soft hiss of cabin air was the last ordinary sound that floated through the first-class cabin. Seconds later, a sharp, devastating crack split the calm. A hand striking a face, and the world inside the fuselage tilted on its axis. A man, presumed authority incarnate, had just assaulted a young black woman. In that instant, he had no idea that the woman he struck was far more than a passenger. She was the unseen architect of his downfall, the hidden owner of the airline itself. This wasn't about revenge. It was about inevitability. The first-class cabin of Flight 922 had been an island of meticulously curated luxury. The murmur of the twin turbofans beneath the fuselage provided a constant hum, a sedative for the wealthy in their designer seats. The air smelled of vanilla-infused leather, delicate perfume, and the faint metallic tang of high-end electronics. Here at 38,000 feet, the world below felt irrelevant, a smeared map of human folly. Seated by the window in 1A was Amara Sinclair. Onlookers might have dismissed her as ordinary. She wore a minimalist slate-gray turtleneck, black tailored trousers, and pristine white sneakers with subtle, almost invisible designer detailing. Her hair was a tight, elegant braid, and on her wrist rested a nondescript silver watch. No jewelry, no extravagance. A sleek, lightweight tablet balanced on her lap, displaying intricate simulations of fluid dynamics, algorithms predicting airflow patterns, and equations that could rival doctoral theses. Amara was 29, but she carried herself with a stillness that belied experience beyond her years. She had built a global tech empire before her 26th birthday with an encryption and data orchestration platform that quietly underpinned nearly every major cloud service on the planet. She had sold her company for billions, vanished from public view, and quietly funneled her wealth into a private equity powerhouse, Aegis Capital, an entity so secretive it operated as if it existed only in shadows. Solara Airlines was one of her quiet acquisitions, a distressed airline she was revitalizing from within. Today, she flew not as a CEO, but as a passenger. She believed that observing operations firsthand, watching staff interactions, service flow, crew behavior, was more revealing than any boardroom report. Her focus was absolute. A flight attendant approached, immaculate and professional. Her name tag read, Lena. "Good afternoon, miss. Would you care for a pre-departure beverage? Perhaps champagne?" Amara's gaze lifted briefly from her tablet. "Just sparkling water. Lemon, please. Thank you." The attendant's relief was palpable. Acknowledgement from someone in charge, someone who noticed her, was a rare gift in first-class service. Lena returned to the galley to fulfill the request. A moment later, a burly man in his early 60s wrestled with an oversized leather bag in the overhead bin across the aisle. His expensive silk shirt strained at the seams. "Ridiculous," he muttered. "Every year, these bins get smaller." Lena returned with Amara's water. "Sir, I can have that checked at the gate when we land," she offered politely. "Gate check?" The man scoffed. "Do you know what this bag costs? Don't touch it." Amara glanced up, her voice calm, almost surgical in its precision. "She is correct. In case of sudden decompression, an object of that mass could become a lethal projectile. FAA regulation 14 CFR 121.589 is explicit on this." The cabin went quiet. The man froze. Lena blinked in surprise. "And who are you to speak?" he demanded. "I'm a passenger," Amara replied, eyes never leaving his, "who prefers not to have people injured by oversized luggage. Please allow the flight attendant to handle her duties." Humiliated, the man shoved the bag toward Lena with a sigh, muttering about preservation of material wealth. She nodded quietly, taking the bag, and the minor conflict dissolved. Amara took a sip of her water and returned to her calculations, unconcerned. The final boarding call was near completion when the cockpit door opened. Out strode Captain Harrison Kane. He was tall, broad-shouldered, silvering temples framing a face weathered by decades in the air. His uniform gleamed under the cabin lights, his epaulets flashing authority. To him, this plane was a kingdom, and every crew member, every passenger, a subject to be managed. He passed the cabin with a swift, dismissive gaze, noting minor irritations, overweight bags, inattentive passengers, service errors. Then his eyes fell on Amara, a young black woman in casual attire. His mind, a well-oiled engine of bias and decades of entitlement, processed her presence like a faulty input. She didn't belong. She was either a celebrity's assistant, a gifted prodigy, or a rich relative using points she didn't earn. He barely acknowledged her and continued toward the galley for his coffee ritual. Lena, arranging glasses, nearly jumped. "Captain, the French press." "Too weak," he boomed. "Bring me a proper dark roast." The conversation was over, but his eyes kept returning to Amara. She had placed her empty glass beside her seat, not on the coaster. To Kane, this was a minor infraction amplified by the potential of chaos. He approached her, polished shoes clicking ominously. "Miss," he said, loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear, "your glass. This isn't casual dining. Use the coaster provided." Amara lifted her gaze, calm but unyielding. "I apologize, Captain. Thank you for pointing it out." Her measured response, devoid of fear or submission, inflamed his sense of authority. "My crew is not here to serve your negligence. You will respect the rules of this cabin," he said, inches from her face. "I already have, Captain," she replied softly, her tone slicing through the tension. "Please return to your duties." Kane's face darkened. "My duties ensure order and comfort for paying passengers. Some people need reminders of standards." "And your standards include humiliating passengers over trivialities," she countered, gaze unwavering. A surge of anger rose, a lifetime of entitlement and authority challenged in one person's quiet defiance. "You don't know who you're speaking to," he growled. "I know exactly who you are," she said. "Harrison Kane, 24 years as captain, commendations in 1998, and 3 formal complaints in the last 6 years for aggression. Your behavior today is documented." His composure cracked. Who was she? FAA inspector? Secret corporate auditor? The realization that he might be exposed pierced his ego. "You think a few facts intimidate me?" He spat, his voice rising. "You are out of your league, girl. My rules, my aircraft." "For the safety of the flight," Amara said, voice precise, "I request you allow the first officer to manage departure." Her words were a scalpel to his pride. Kane snapped. His hand rose, a blur of navy and gold, connecting with her cheek. The sharp crack reverberated, silence enveloping the cabin. Amara's braid whipped, her expression unchanged, but her eyes held a new intensity, a silent storm ready to break. She didn't cry or shout. She simply stared, and the gravity of her presence sank in. Kane had not just struck a passenger, he had crossed into the territory of consequences he could never manage. The jet bridge felt sterile, a corridor of cold metal and fluorescent light that separated the artificial calm of the cabin from the bustling chaos of the airport terminal. Amara Sinclair walked with an unhurried, deliberate pace, her backpack slung lightly over one shoulder. The dull ache on her cheek was a reminder of the assault, but her mind had already moved past physical sensation. Pain was irrelevant. Data, consequences, and probabilities occupied every corner of her awareness. At the gate desk, a flustered agent glanced up. His eyes widened at the crimson imprint across her cheek. He opened his mouth, but she raised a hand, a silent command for attention. "Tell me one thing," she said, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "What is the tail number of the aircraft?" "N 922 SA," the agent stammered, caught between fear and confusion. "Thank you," Amara said, committing it to memory. She turned away, walking past stunned passengers, whose whispers had spread like wildfire across the terminal. Heads turned, phones emerged. A few tried to follow her gaze to the captain still on the jet bridge behind her. She found a secluded corner, pulled out her phone, and bypassed her usual contacts. Her thumb hovered over a single encrypted entry, Malcolm Hayes. Malcolm answered on the first ring. His voice was a precise balance of calm authority and underlying menace. "Amara, is everything all right? You were supposed to be in the air." There's been an alteration to my travel plans, Malcolm, she said, voice flat, controlled, as if emotion were a variable she had eliminated. Go on, he said, the tone instantly sharpening. I have been assaulted and forcibly removed from Flight 922. The pilot, Captain Harrison Kane, physically struck me. Tail number N922SA. Silence followed. Malcolm Hayes had been involved in hostile acquisitions, corporate espionage, and the quiet liquidation of billion-dollar entities. Yet this, an assault on the owner of his own airline, left him momentarily speechless. Assaulted, he finally said, each syllable dripping with disbelief and simmering fury. Am I injured? Malcolm asked. Do you require immediate medical attention? I can have a team there in minutes. No medical assistance is necessary, Amara replied. This is about consequences. We are about to initiate a protocol. Within seconds, Malcolm's mind began calculating. The entire crew, the captain's authority, the flight path, the potential legal and PR fallout. It was a web of risks, each one a variable to control. Understood, he said finally. Give me the details, step by step. Nothing is to be left to improvisation. Amara keyed a series of encrypted instructions into her phone. Every move she made was precise, calculated to leave no gap for retaliation. Her network of legal, corporate, and logistical operatives would descend silently, invisibly, like a force the world would only notice after the consequences had crystallized. Meanwhile, in the private cockpit of Flight 922, Kane paced, still flushed with residual adrenaline. His face mirrored the chaos in his mind. He had struck a passenger, an insult, a violation, and the ripple effects of his actions were now outside his control. The flight attendants whispered in corners, their professional composure trembling at the edges. Lena, holding the French press, glanced at the cockpit door. Her training screamed restraint, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her understanding. This wasn't just misconduct. This was the beginning of an avalanche. Kane tried to compose himself. He reassured himself. Authority, protocol, tenure. That was all that mattered. Yet a creeping uncertainty gnawed at him. The red mark on her face, the deliberate stare, the calm assurance, was not fear. It was control. She had assessed him in a heartbeat, understood his weaknesses, and now the entire aircraft and crew were unwitting witnesses to a storm he could not yet measure. Back in the terminal, Amara's team began to mobilize. Communications lines buzzed, encrypted channels flared. Every detail, the airline's shareholder structure, operational weaknesses, crew protocols, media contingencies, was being analyzed and locked into place. Malcolm's voice came through again. Amara, this Kane, he doesn't know who he just hit. What's the plan? Contain, she said. Immediate containment. Secure witnesses, gather evidence, and prepare for a corporate reorganization at scale. His actions are a liability. He will be removed and the brand protected. The public will hear nothing until we choose the narrative. Everything else is secondary. As she spoke, her calm, deliberate tone carried the unshakable certainty of someone who had orchestrated billions in unseen transactions. Kane was no longer merely a pilot. He had become an equation of risk, and Amara was the algorithm that would solve it, silently, decisively, and absolutely. The first passengers trickled into the terminal from the jet bridge, confusion and gossip trailing in their wake. Few could comprehend what had just transpired. The cameras and phones and nervous whispers would ripple outwards. But the true story, the depth of the consequence, the invisible force that now controlled the situation, was not yet visible. Amara took a steadying breath. Every movement, every word, every calculation had been executed with the precision that had built her empire. She was not merely reacting. She was predicting, preparing, controlling. She was a storm, silent until it struck, and Captain Kane had just become the epicenter of its inevitability. The terminal clock ticked forward, indifferent to human arrogance, as the quiet mechanics of justice, precision, and consequence began their inexorable work. The muted chaos of the terminal deepened. Airline staff whispered, passengers gawked, and the distant rumble of departing jets filled the background like a low drumbeat. Kane retreated to the cockpit lounge, attempting to call a semblance of authority over a situation that had already slipped beyond his grasp. Every rationalization, his tenure, his experience, his rank, sounded hollow against the memory of Amara's cold, unwavering gaze. Back at the quiet corner of the terminal, Amara had already initiated the first layer of her protocol. Screens flickered to life on her encrypted tablet. Boarding logs, passenger manifests, crew records, flight data. Every variable was cataloged. Every possible outcome had been pre-calculated. Her fingers danced over the interface with surgical precision. Step 1. Isolate witnesses. Crew and passengers who had seen the incident would be subtly secured in discrete locations for statements and confirmations. Step 2. Neutralize risk. Kane would be prevented from taking any further flights until the investigation concluded. Step 3. Protect the brand. A coordinated PR narrative was drafted, designed to appear proactive and ethical should the story reach public channels. Step 4. Initiate corporate realignment. Leadership vulnerabilities exposed by Kane's actions would be sealed, ensuring operational continuity and legal insulation. Malcolm Hayes, seated across the terminal with a discreet laptop, followed the unfolding sequence in real time. "This is surgical," he muttered. "You're treating the airline like a chessboard." "That's exactly what it is," Amara replied. "Every person, every protocol, every response is a piece to be moved deliberately. Nothing is accidental. Kane has no idea what he's triggered." Inside the aircraft, Kane fumed, pacing the cockpit floor. The first officer had returned to his station, eyes wide but professional, unsure whether to address Kane's erratic behavior or focus on departure duties. Flight attendants whispered, sharing fragments of gossip. The owner had been assaulted, a first-class passenger had been struck, and yet no one had moved to intervene beyond the immediate flight crew. Lena, the young flight attendant, was shaken. She felt a profound conflict between professionalism and morality. This captain had violated every protocol of conduct, yet he still wielded authority. And yet the chill of inevitability hung in the air. Something had shifted, and she could sense it without understanding how. Meanwhile, Amara's private security detail had arrived discreetly. Witnesses were carefully relocated to quiet rooms near the terminal gates. Crew statements were taken calmly, without panic, yet every word was meticulously recorded, every reaction logged. Even the passengers in 1A and surrounding seats were engaged, subtly guided to provide corroborating accounts if needed. Malcolm leaned back, watching the cascading data unfold. Once this goes live, Kane won't know which end is up. Every legal, PR, and corporate move is lined up like dominoes. Amara tapped her tablet once more. Step 5. Financial oversight. Any attempt by Kane to interfere with operational funds, flight schedules, or internal communications would be automatically flagged and blocked. The airline's internal network was now layered with invisible firewalls, access points tightly controlled. Every possible channel of leverage Kane might attempt to use was preemptively neutralized. At the same time, the quiet hum of the terminal seemed to mock Kane's impotence. He was accustomed to obedience, to the unquestioned weight of uniformed authority. Yet every move he had made in the first-class cabin, every rise in voice and swing of hand, now existed as irrefutable evidence of misconduct. And the woman he had assaulted, the one he assumed powerless, was orchestrating a collapse of everything he had built over decades. Kane's phone buzzed with messages he did not open. Each unread notification represented another layer of control slipping from his fingers. Calls from crew members, queries from ground staff, inquiries from operational control, all of them futile attempts to reassert dominance that no longer existed. In the terminal, Amara stood, silent, a figure of calm authority. Her backpack was slung over one shoulder, her tablet clutched lightly in her hand. She walked toward a quiet conference room. Inside, a secure network of advisors awaited, legal, operational, PR, and financial experts. "Step 1 is complete," she said. Her tone was flat, precise, every syllable carrying the weight of command. We have gathered witness statements, secured evidence, and initiated containment. Step 2 is underway. Kane will not leave the airport until all actions are complete. Step 3, the public-facing narrative, is drafted and ready for controlled release. Step 4, internal corporate safeguards, are being implemented now. Each operative nodded, executing their tasks silently. Their movements were choreographed, precise. The quiet hum of terminal activity continued outside, oblivious to the storm unfolding within. Back on the aircraft, Kane realized the extent of his isolation. Calls to superiors went unanswered. The first officer maintained professional distance. Crew members whispered with veiled concern, and the entire cabin had become an arena of observation rather than obedience. He was alone with his guilt, fear, and the growing realization that Amara Sinclair was no ordinary passenger. The first domino had fallen, and the pattern of inevitability was now unbreakable. Captain Harrison Kane sat in the private lounge of the terminal, his body rigid, his mind spinning. The weight of his mistake pressed down like gravity he couldn't escape. Calls went unanswered. Crew members avoided his gaze. Every attempt to assert authority felt like an echo bouncing off an invisible wall of inevitability. Outside, Amara Sinclair's team moved with precision. Witnesses were in secured locations, statements meticulously logged, and surveillance footage from the cabin, high resolution, time-stamped, irrefutable, had been copied to multiple secure drives. Every passenger who had observed the incident had been subtly guided to corroborate the same sequence of events. There would be no dispute, no ambiguity, no possibility for Kane to spin a narrative in his favor. Malcolm Hayes coordinated silently. Legal holds were placed immediately, contracts invoked, operational authority reassigned. Kane's credentials, normally untouchable, were suspended within minutes. Flight schedules were adjusted without notifying him. Aircraft access restricted. Internal communications rerouted. The man who had once ruled the skies now had no control over a single variable in his domain. In a quiet conference room a few gates down, Amara oversaw the execution of the next phase. Activate containment for all digital and physical access points, she instructed, her voice calm, precise. Ensure no unilateral decisions can be made by Kane or his allies. Simultaneously, prepare the internal communications to staff, framing this as a proactive leadership measure for safety and brand integrity. One by one, her directives were executed flawlessly. Airline staff received carefully worded emails explaining the situation. Kane had been temporarily relieved of duties pending investigation. Passengers would be assured of a commitment to safety and professionalism. Media monitors, both internal and external, were prepared to release statements within the hour. The narrative would be controlled before rumors could spread. Meanwhile, Kane received a formal message from the airline's board. Effective immediately, Captain Harrison Kane is relieved of all flight duties pending an investigation into alleged misconduct on Solara Airlines Flight 922. Further instructions will follow from the corporate headquarters. He stared at the screen, disbelief giving way to panic. His mind raced. How did she do this? Who is she? Amara's presence was everywhere, yet invisible. The witnesses, the statements, the legal containment, the PR strategy, all orchestrated before Kane had even processed the first strike. She had anticipated every reaction, calculated every potential delay, and executed a plan so complete it left him paralyzed. Lena, the flight attendant who had witnessed the assault, was escorted to a private area to provide her formal statement. I've never seen anything like this, she whispered to a legal operative. He's out of control, and she's terrifyingly calm. Amara nodded slightly, acknowledging the report. Calmness was a tool, a weapon. It conveyed mastery over chaos. Kane, on the other hand, had allowed emotion, pride, anger, entitlement to cloud judgment, leaving him exposed. Minutes turned into hours, and the containment tightened. Kane's attempts to contact corporate offices were intercepted, logged, and addressed by Amara's legal team. Every argument he might have made, every defensive maneuver, had already been predicted and nullified. The first wave of internal communications went out to staff. In the interest of maintaining operational safety and the integrity of Solara Airlines, Captain Harrison Kane has been temporarily relieved of flight duties. Safety and service standards remain our top priority. The language was neutral, professional, but the effect was devastating. Kane's reputation, meticulously built over decades, was immediately questioned. Even loyal colleagues began to doubt him, unsure how such swift action had been orchestrated. Outside the terminal, Amara moved with deliberate purpose. Her tablet buzzed with real-time updates, flight logs, crew confirmations, passenger statements, legal checkpoints. Everything was unfolding according to her calculations. Every domino she had placed was falling exactly as intended. Kane attempted to push back, sending desperate texts, calling former colleagues, trying to assert some measure of authority. Each attempt was blocked or redirected. He was trapped in a network of containment so complete it was invisible yet absolute. The man who once ruled the skies found himself powerless, a hostage to a system he could neither manipulate nor comprehend. Amara's calm presence in the terminal contrasted sharply with the chaos in Kane's mind. She was the eye of a storm that had already begun, the fulcrum of inevitability. Every action she had taken was precise, every variable accounted for. The world had shifted, and Kane was the epicenter of his own collapse. By the time passengers disembarked fully and the first wave of staff statements were collected, the airline was no longer under Kane's control. Every operational detail, every public-facing narrative, every internal protocol, secured, controlled, and ready for execution under Amara's direction. She leaned against the wall, watching the terminal hum around her, expression unreadable. The assault on Flight 922 had been the spark. What followed would be the calculated blaze of consequences, precise, inevitable, and irreversible. Kane's arrogance had collided with a mind that measured everything in outcomes, and the result was clear. The universe had responded. The world outside the terminal had no idea what had just occurred. Screens in lounges, news tickers, and social media feeds flickered with mundane updates. Departures, arrivals, flight delays. None of it reflected the storm that had quietly erupted inside Solara Airlines' command structure. Inside a secure conference room, Amara Sinclair orchestrated the next phase. Malcolm Hayes sat beside her, eyes scanning a tablet full of operational updates. "Public narrative?" he asked. "Controlled release," she replied. "The media sees an airline taking swift, decisive action to maintain passenger safety and uphold corporate standards. They do not see the intricate containment behind the scenes, the preemptive legal measures, or the network of witness corroboration." Malcolm nodded. "Kane is completely isolated?" "Completely," she said. "All access points neutralized, all communications routed through controlled channels. He cannot make a move without triggering an immediate response, and the crew and passengers are secured. Every statement accounted for, every variable measured. He is contained and powerless." Meanwhile, Kane sat in a small, empty office space in the terminal, staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop. Every attempt to contact headquarters was intercepted. Every message he sent bounced back or was silently logged and redirected to Amara's team. His mind raced, desperate for leverage, for an escape. But every angle he had relied on, authority, tenure, familiarity with procedures, had been neutralized before he even realized they were being tested. In the background, Amara's team activated Step 6, operational consolidation. Flight schedules were adjusted, command chains reassigned, and internal oversight tightened. Every department received subtle instructions, ensuring that no one could act outside of Amara's control. Kane's authority was nullified completely. The airline now operated in a precise choreography orchestrated by her team. The first wave of public-facing statements went live. Press releases appeared in major news outlets. Solara Airlines confirms Captain Harrison Kane has been temporarily relieved of flight duties pending a formal investigation into reported passenger misconduct. Solara Airlines remains committed to the highest standards of safety, service, and corporate responsibility. Social media buzzed, speculation began, but the controlled narrative left no room for misinterpretation. The public saw a professional, ethical airline responding decisively. Kane's arrogance, once his shield, had become his undoing. Back at the terminal, Amara stood quietly, observing the ripple effects. Crew members whispered among themselves, passengers gawked, and Kane sat isolated, powerless, and increasingly desperate. She did not need to speak. Her presence alone communicated command. The universe of consequences she had set in motion was complete, yet invisible to everyone except those who mattered. Kane tried one last desperate measure, a call to a former colleague in the boardroom. The call went unanswered. Every avenue of influence he had relied upon was blocked. Every ally preemptively aligned with Amara. Panic edged into his mind, the rationalizations and justifications crumbling. The man who had ruled the skies for decades now realized the terrifying truth. He had collided with a force beyond his understanding. A mind that calculated, predicted, and controlled every outcome with surgical precision. In the quiet of the conference room, Amara finally allowed herself a slight breath. She did not smile. She did not gloat. There was no need. Kane's downfall was inevitable, orchestrated with a precision he could never have anticipated. The assault on Flight 922 had been the trigger. The consequences, a cascade of inevitability. Malcolm looked at her, all restrained behind professional calm. "He's finished," he said quietly. Amara nodded, her eyes scanning the live feeds, the secure statements, the controlled narrative. "Finished professionally," she said. "Personally, that is for him to comprehend, in private. He has learned the cost of arrogance, of mistaking authority for power, of failing to measure the consequences of a single act. Every operational detail fell into place. The airline was secure, the narrative controlled, and Kane's world, built over decades, was unraveling faster than he could comprehend. Passengers and staff remained calm, oblivious to the invisible storm of precision and strategy around them. The universe of silent, hidden power had moved, and Kane had no choice but to reckon with the consequences. As Amara finally stood to leave, her presence commanded a silence that was almost reverent. She did not need to enforce control. Her careful, deliberate orchestration had already achieved it. Kane remained, a man undone, staring at the sterile walls of the terminal, aware too late that the collision between arrogance and calculated power was absolute and irreversible. The storm had passed, but its impact would echo indefinitely. A reminder that authority without wisdom, power without foresight, and arrogance without understanding could only lead to ruin. Captain Harrison. Kane sat alone in a windowless office, the sterile hum of the terminal around him fading into a background blur. The weight of his career, of decades of unquestioned authority, pressed down with a gravity he could no longer escape. Every corner of his world had been touched by Amara Sinclair's orchestration, every channel of influence neutralized. He realized in stark clarity that nothing remained under his control. Amara, meanwhile, moved through the terminal with calm precision. Her tablet displayed a live feed of operational adjustments, crew compliance, passenger statements, and corporate communications. Every variable was accounted for, every risk mitigated. The airline, once teetering under Kane's unchecked ego, now functioned like a meticulously engineered machine under her quiet command. Malcolm Hayes, seated at her side in the secure operations hub, watched the cascade of outcomes unfold. "She's done it," he muttered. "Completely. Kane's authority is gone. Every structural weakness has been sealed." Amara's gaze did not waver from the screens. "It's not enough to remove him from power," she said softly. "He must understand privately the consequences of his actions. Only then does the lesson fully resonate." Back in his office, Kane's phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages from colleagues, flight operations, and even union contacts all went unanswered or redirected. Legal holds prevented him from sending any emails or accessing critical files. Every attempt to regain control or influence outcomes was systematically blocked. He felt the first prickling of panic, growing into full-blown terror. Amara had anticipated this reaction. She did not need to be present physically. The architecture of control she had designed ensured that Kane's collapse was both immediate and absolute. She moved as if orchestrating a symphony from another dimension, each note of consequence falling precisely where it should. Minutes later, a secure message arrived on Kane's tablet. Effective immediately, all operational and corporate authority held by Captain Harrison Kane is suspended indefinitely. He is to cooperate with a formal investigation conducted under the supervision of the airline's board and legal counsel. The message was simple, sterile, but devastating. Kane stared at it, unable to process the scale of what had occurred. The world he had navigated for decades, built on authority, prestige, and unquestioned control, had evaporated in a single collision with a mind that understood consequences at a level far beyond his comprehension. Amara's next phase was subtle but final. Crew members and passengers who had been witnesses were discreetly debriefed, their statements confirmed, cross-checked, and filed. The narrative, both internal and external, was fully controlled. Any potential rumor, dissent, or counter-narrative had been neutralized before it could surface. Then came the final move. Amara initiated the strategic consolidation of leadership within the airline. She assumed direct operational oversight through Helios Capital's influence, restructuring the chain of command, establishing redundancies, and reinforcing protocols. The airline, previously vulnerable under Kane's unchecked ego, now operated as a fortified entity, guided by her precision and vision. Kane, isolated, powerless, and facing the full scope of his miscalculation, finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. The hand that had struck Amara Sinclair was not just a physical blow. It had triggered an invisible chain of events that dismantled his authority, his reputation, and the very structure he had relied upon for decades. Amara, standing quietly in the operations hub, observed Kane's inevitable reckoning unfold. She did not need to intervene directly. The architecture of consequences was complete. Kane's fall was total, his collapse precise, and yet there was no gloating in her eyes, only the quiet inevitability of a system responding exactly as it had been designed to respond. Hours later, as the terminal quieted and passengers dispersed, Amara walked toward a private exit. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate. Every step carried the silent authority of someone who had mastered not just outcomes, but the very mechanisms of control. Kane remained behind, a man undone, facing the irreversible consequences of arrogance meeting strategy, power, and calculation. In the distance, the hum of departing planes continued, indifferent to human folly. But for those who had witnessed the collision, the lesson was indelible. Authority without wisdom, power without foresight, and arrogance without understanding inevitably led to ruin. Amara Sinclair disappeared into the terminal, leaving behind a company secured, a brand protected, and a world reminded that the quiet force of calculated consequences is far more formidable than the loud, erratic display of unchecked ego. The universe had spoken, Kane had lost, and the orchestration of silent, hidden power had completed its course. The following morning, Solara Airlines media channels were alive with the first official reports. Headlines read, "Solara Airlines takes swift action to ensure passenger safety and professional standards. Captain Harrison Kane, temporarily relieved of duties amid investigation." The statements were carefully worded, professional, calm, and devoid of sensationalism. Social media amplified the narrative with threads emphasizing corporate responsibility and swift, decisive action. Analysts praised the airline for proactive governance and strong leadership in times of crisis. Amara Sinclair, seated in a quiet corner of her private suite, observed the ripple effects with detached precision. She had anticipated every headline, every comment, every question that might arise. Every piece of the public narrative had been pre-calculated to reinforce the image of a company led by integrity, while leaving no trace of the orchestration behind the scenes. A secure video feed displayed the airline's internal operations. Crew members, once anxious and uncertain, now moved with confidence under the new protocol she had enacted. Flight schedules proceeded without disruption. The operational chain of command, which Kane had once dominated, now functioned flawlessly. Every leak, every point of vulnerability had been sealed. Her encrypted phone buzzed. Malcolm Hayes' face appeared on the screen. "It's done," he said, voice low but awed. "The narrative is controlled. Staff are aligned. Passengers are satisfied. Kane, he's completely contained." Amara's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Good," she said. "Containment was only the first step. The second is perception. We don't just remove threats, we demonstrate stability, leadership, and vision. That is what the world sees and what the world believes." Meanwhile, Kane remained in terminal isolation, bombarded by calls he could not answer, emails he could not send, and colleagues who no longer recognized his authority. Every move he had made to assert control had been anticipated and neutralized. His professional identity, the foundation of his life, was crumbling, replaced by an unshakable understanding of the consequences of arrogance. Back in the corporate suite, Amara leaned back in her chair, watching the final pieces fall into place. Press inquiries had been routed to carefully scripted spokespersons. Crew statements were complete, signed, and filed. Airline operations were secure, resilient, and insulated from further disruption. And Kane, the man who had believed in the invincibility of authority, had learned the terrifying cost of miscalculation. She finally allowed herself a deep breath. The orchestration was complete, elegant in its precision, absolute in its inevitability. No action remained unchecked, no loose ends unaddressed. The airline was safe, the brand protected, and the lesson clear. Arrogance meets consequences, and consequences are unavoidable when confronted with strategy, calculation, and foresight. Amara stood, her tablet secured, her movements deliberate. She walked through the terminal with the calm authority of someone who had mastered not only outcomes, but the very mechanisms that produce them. Passengers moved past, oblivious to the storm she had tamed, the chaos she had contained, the invisible threads she had woven through every corner of the airline. Kane remained behind, a relic of authority undone. He realized with chilling clarity that no apology, no explanation, no desperate maneuver could undo the events set in motion by a single act of arrogance. The collision with Amara Sinclair had been total, absolute, and irreversible. Outside, the hum of jets and the bustle of the airport carried on, indifferent. But for those who had witnessed the collision of ego and consequence, the lesson was indelible. True power lies not in titles, uniforms, or years of experience, but in foresight, precision, and the silent mastery of outcomes. Amara disappeared from the terminal as quietly as she had arrived, leaving a company secure, a narrative controlled, and a man to reckon privately with the consequences of his own hubris. The world would see only stability and competence. The unseen orchestration remained hers alone, a testament to the quiet, unstoppable force of deliberate, calculated power. The storm had passed. The airline, the brand, and the principle of accountability had survived. And Captain Harrison Kane, once untouchable, had learned a lesson no title could protect him from. In the universe of hidden power, a single act of arrogance is always met with consequences far beyond comprehension.